Think for a moment about just how incredibly complex things are inside, even the smallest living thing.
Hmm.
Have you ever wondered how diseases can actually take hold right down at that microscopic level within our cells?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. Today, we're going on a bit of a journey, actually, a deep dive into that cellular world.
Right.
We're exploring a group of conditions that affect our dogs and cats. Lysosomal storage diseases.
Exactly. We've been looking at some pretty detailed scientific sources on these, and what really stands out is how one, well, seemingly small glitch at the cellular level can have such huge consequences.
A small glitch causing big problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the heart of it all are these things called lysosomes. You can sort of picture them as tiny recycling plants inside each cell.
Okay, cellular recycling plants. I like that.
Yeah, and waste disposal units, too. They have these specialized tools, enzymes, that break down all sorts of materials, old proteins, fats, that kind of thing.
So like the workers and machines in the plant.
Got it. So what happens when this internal waste management system breaks down?
Well, the fundamental problem in these lysosomal storage diseases is that there's a missing enzyme, or maybe a faulty one, inside those lysosomes.
Wow.
And if that specific enzyme isn't there or it just doesn't work right, it can't do its job breaking down a particular substance.
Right.
So that substance, the undigested material, it just starts to accumulate inside the cell. It builds up.
That makes total sense. It's like if the recycling center's machine for sorting glass breaks down.
Exactly.
Pretty soon you just have piles and piles of unsorted glass building up, messing everything else up.
Precisely that analogy.
Yeah.
And, depending on what kind of material builds up, maybe proteins or sugar or protein combos, fats, other complex molecules, we see different types of these diseases.
Different types based on the waste.
Yeah. The sources mention terms like proteinosis, glycoproteinosis, glyco meaning sugar, they're single lipidoses, mucopolysaccharidoses.
Whoa, okay. Those are some big words. They are. But you don't need to memorize all those names right now. The key thing is, each category means a different type of cellular waste is piling up because its specific sorting machine is broken.
Okay, so it's all about this unhealthy buildup of stuff the cell just can't process. And these conditions, the sources tell us, they're inherited, right? Passed down.
Yes, the vast majority follow what's called an autosomal recessive inheritance pattern.
Autosomal recessive. What does that mean in simple terms?
It basically means that for an animal to actually get the disease, it needs to inherit 2 copies of the faulty gene,
2 copies.
one from each parent. Often, the parents themselves are just carriers.
Carriers.
Meaning they have 1 copy of the mutated gene, but they look perfectly healthy. They don't show signs of the disease.
I see. So our mission today, then, is to really dig into these lysosomal storage diseases, understand what they are, how they actually show up in our pets, and why knowing this stuff matters.
Right. Why it's important for animal lovers or really anyone interested in how biology works.
Exactly. So let's start with who gets affected. Which animals are we talking about?
Well, the sources show it's actually a surprisingly wide range of dog and cat breeds. Different breeds can be affected by different types of these diseases.
Okay.
So in dogs, you see it in German Shepherds, Beagles, Labradors, many others, really. The list is quite long.
Wow.
And in cats, breeds like Persians, Siamese, even, your common domestic shorthair can be susceptible.
It's pretty striking how many different breeds are mentioned. It really shows this isn't just some rare, obscure thing.
Not at all.
And when do these problems usually start? When would an owner notice something's wrong?
For most affected animals, the signs usually pop up before they hit their first birthday.
Before 1 year old.
Okay.
But, and this is important to remember, there are some of these diseases where the onset is actually later. Sometimes not until they're 2 years old, maybe even older.
That could make things tricky.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
It adds a layer of complexity to diagnosis in those cases. Right. So if the root problem is way down at this tiny cellular level, what kind of outward signs do we actually see in these poor animals?
The signs can vary quite a bit. The sources really emphasize this. It depends heavily on which specific enzyme is missing or faulty and just how bad the deficiency is.
Makes sense. Different buildup, different problems.
Exactly. And what's also interesting is that in some of these diseases, even those carrier animals we mentioned, the ones with just 1 bad copy of the gene,
Yeah.
even they can sometimes show milder forms of the disease.
Really? That's fascinating. So even a single genetic typo can sometimes have a noticeable effect. But the sources also highlight that neurological signs are pretty common, right?
That's right. Very common. Because the nervous system is so complex, so reliant on precise cell function.
Yeah.
Any disruption in those lysosomes often shows up as neurological problems. Typically, an affected puppy or kitten seems totally normal at birth.
Okay.
Then over time, they might start to fail to thrive,
Fail to thrive.
meaning they don't grow or develop like their litter mates.
Yeah.
They lag behind. We might also see skeletal issues, especially in that group called mucopolysaccharidosis we mentioned earlier.
Right, the bone problems. And when we talk neurological signs, the list seems quite long. The sources mention cerebellar dysfunction. What would that look like to an owner?
Good question. Cerebellar dysfunction often presents as something called an intention tremor.
Intention tremor.
Yeah, it's a shaking that gets worse when the animal deliberately tries to do something, like reaching for food or a toy.
Okay, I can picture that.
You might also see nystagmus. It's like involuntary rapid eye movements, or dysmetria,
Dysmetria.
which is difficulty judging distance. They might overshoot when trying to grab something, or just seem generally clumsy, uncoordinated.
Okay, yeah, clumsy. And the sources also mention peripheral neuropathy. What's that?
So peripheral neuropathy means damage to the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord, the ones in the limbs, mostly.
Okay. And how does that show up?
It can lead to weakness in the legs, what we call hyperreflexia or areflexia.
Meaning?
Their reflexes are weaker than normal, or maybe even totally absent. Like the vet tapping their knee.
Ah, right.
You might also see muscle wasting, where the muscles get smaller. So the animal might have trouble walking, seem unsteady, maybe lose feeling in their paws.
That sounds really significant. And are there other neurological signs besides those?
Oh, yes. The list goes on. Ataxia, that's general lack of coordination. They might get tired really easily during exercise, so exercise intolerance.
Yeah.
They could have seizures. You might notice changes in their behavior, maybe vision problems or deafness developing.
Wow.
Some animals develop repetitive, stereotypical behaviors. They might have proprioceptive deficits that's like they don't seem to know where their feet are unless they're looking right at them.
Poor things, like their body awareness is off.
Exactly. And then just general tremors, too. It's a really wide range of potential issues.
It really paints a picture of a system breaking down, piece by piece. And it's not just the nervous system, is it? The sources mention non-neurological signs, too.
That's right. Sometimes we see organomegaly.
Orgomegaly.
Yeah, abnormal enlargement of organs like the liver or spleen, because storage material builds up there, too.
Yeah.
Those skeletal malformations we talked about.
Right.
And in some specific types, there can be eye problems. Things like corneal opacification, where the clear front part of the eye gets cloudy, or cataracts developing.
So a single tiny defect in one gene can really ripple outwards and affect the whole body in so many ways.
It really can.
Which brings us naturally to the cause.
Yeah.
What exactly is going wrong? We've touched on genetics, but can we get a bit more specific?
Sure. As the sources clearly state, the root cause is genetic. It's a deletion or a mutation, basically a mistake in one single specific gene.
A typo in the instruction manual.
Exactly. A
Yeah.
tiny typo in the cell's DNA blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
And this faulty gene means either the cell doesn't produce a particular lysosomal enzyme at all, or it produces very little, or sometimes the enzyme gets produced, but it's just shaped wrong, so it doesn't function correctly. It can't do its job. And like we discussed, being a certain breed can be a big risk factor because these specific genetic mutations tend to pop up more often in certain breed populations.
Right, because they're passed down. So if a vet suspects one of these diseases based on all these possible signs, how do they actually figure it out? How do they diagnose it? It sounds like it could be really tough.
It definitely can be challenging. That's why the sources list several differential diagnoses.
Meaning other things it could be.
Exactly. Other conditions with similar symptoms, things like metabolic problems affecting the brain, maybe toxin exposure, other issues with the cerebellum, infections in the nervous system, or even other types of inherited metabolic diseases.
So ruling those out is step one.
Often, yes. Trying to narrow down the possibilities.
And what about standard tests, like blood work or urine tests? Can they help?
Sometimes they provide initial clues. Routine blood tests, like a CBC and biochemistry panel, plus a urinalysis. For example, in some LSDs, you might see something called cytoplasmic vacuolation in the white blood cells.
Vacuum.
Yeah, basically little bubbles or vacuoles appearing inside the cells because they're stuffed with that storage material.
Ah, visible evidence.
And also, in certain specific diseases, like one called alpha-mannosidosis, you might find abnormal substances directly in the urine.
So those general tests can sometimes wave a red flag, but it sounds like you usually need more specialized tests for a definite answer.
Absolutely. Imaging like X-rays can be useful for spotting those bone abnormalities. especially the mucopolysaccharidoses.
Okay.
And for some specific conditions, like globoid cell leukodystrophy, an MRI of the brain can actually show characteristic damage patterns in the white matter.
MRI can see changes in the brain itself. What about looking even closer at the cells or genes?
Yes, molecular genetic testing has become huge. For many of these diseases, we can now directly test the animal's DNA for that specific gene mutation causing the problem.
Wow, that's definitive.
It can be. And this testing is also great for identifying those healthy-looking carrier animals we talked about.
Right, for breeding decisions.
Exactly. Plus, taking small samples, aspirates, or biopsies from organs like the liver or spleen.
Needles involved.
Usually, yes. Tiny samples. Examining those under a microscope can reveal that characteristic buildup of storage material right inside the cells. Very direct evidence.
Okay. And what about the enzymes themselves? Can you test if they're actually working or not?
Yes, that's another key diagnostic approach. There are biochemical tests to measure the activity levels of specific lysosomal enzymes.
How do they do that?
They can test various tissues or fluids, blood serum, brain tissue, liver, white blood cells, even cultured skin cells. If they find very low or absent activity for a particular enzyme,
Then you know that's the problem.
pretty much, or finding high levels of the substance it's supposed to break down. It's like directly measuring the broken part in our recycling center analogy. Very strong evidence.
Gotcha. And for the neurological signs, the weakness, the coordination problems, any specific tests for those?
There are electromyography, or EMG, and nerve conduction studies. These tests evaluate how well the peripheral nerves and muscles are working.
Okay.
They can show abnormalities if there's peripheral neuropathy or muscle damage involved. And sometimes a biopsy, a small sample of a nerve or muscle, might be needed to look for specific changes under the microscope.
So a whole toolkit vets can use to piece together the puzzle. But the big question then is treatment. Given these are fundamental genetic issues, what can actually be done for these animals?
Yeah, that's the tough part. Unfortunately, the sources are quite clear that these diseases are generally progressive.
Meaning they get worse over time.
Yes, and for most, they are ultimately fatal. Right now, there aren't cures for the majority of them.
That's hard to hear.
It is. So outpatient care really focuses on managing the symptoms, trying to keep the animal comfortable, and maintain their quality of life for as long as possible.
What does that involve?
Things like making sure their environment is safe, padding sharp corners, preventing falls, ensuring they get good nutrition, stay hydrated. Sometimes nutritional support, like feeding tubes, might be needed if they can't eat properly.
Okay, supportive care. What about more direct interventions? Did the sources mention anything experimental?
They did. Bone marrow transplantation has been tried experimentally for some LSDs with varying levels of success. It's complex.
Right.
Gene therapy trying to actually fix the underlying genetic defect that's a huge area of active research. Lots of hope there for the future.
Gene therapy. Sounds promising, but maybe not quite ready yet.
Generally not yet standard clinical practice? No. Same for experimental enzyme replacement therapy. That's where they try to give the animal the missing enzyme.
Giving them back the missing piece.
Yeah. It's shown some promise in research, but again, not widely available as the standard treatment right now. Logistical challenges, cost, effectiveness. Lots to work out.
So while there's definitely encouraging research happening, it sounds like for owners right now, it's mostly about managing the condition. But the sources also stressed another really crucial aspect.
Absolutely. Prevention. Because these are inherited diseases, the most effective approach we currently have is preventing them from occurring in the first place.
How do you do that?
Through responsible breeding practices, using that genetic testing we talked about to identify carriers.
Ah, so you don't breed two carriers together.
Exactly. Because if you do, there's a high chance, a 1 in 4 chance with each pup or kitten that they'll inherit 2 bad copies and get the disease. It's about making informed breeding decisions based on genetic risk.
Understanding the genetics is key.
Crucial. Oh, and the sources also briefly note that affected animals can be more prone to secondary infections, so those would need treating too if they pop up.
Okay. So it's a difficult situation for affected pets and owners, but genetics offers a path to prevention, which kind of brings us back to the bigger picture. Why does diving deep into all this cellular and genetic detail really matter?
Well, I mean, for anyone who loves dogs or cats, understanding these conditions is just vital for their health and welfare.
True.
It really highlights why responsible breeding and genetic testing can be so important. But even beyond that, these lysosomal storage diseases offer this incredible window into how life works at a fundamental level.
It really is that aha moment, isn't it? When you grasp how one tiny error, just one missing enzyme molecule,
Yeah.
can cascade outwards and have such widespread, devastating effects on a whole animal. It just underscores the delicate balance inside our cells, how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. If you zoom out, it really shows the power of genetics in health and disease.
Mhm.
It highlights the incredible complexity of all those metabolic pathways inside cells.
Yeah.
How messing up what seems like one tiny step can cause this whole chain reaction of problems. And actually, studying these relatively rare diseases in animals often gives us valuable insights into similar genetic diseases that affect humans, too.
But helps advance medicine overall.
It contributes to our general understanding of biology and medicine.
Yeah. So let's try and bring it all together from this deep dive. Lysosomal storage diseases in dogs and cats, they're inherited conditions. A flaw in the cell's recycling machinery, basically.
Right. A missing or faulty enzyme in the lysosome.
Which leads to this harmful buildup of unprocessed stuff inside the cells.
Causing a huge range of symptoms, often severe, usually progressive.
And we've really seen how central genetics is. It really drives home the importance of responsible breeding, genetic awareness.
Absolutely. And while treatments are still limited for money, that ongoing research, especially in gene therapy and enzyme replacement, does offer some hope for the future.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How many seemingly disconnected symptoms can actually trace back to one single fundamental mistake at the molecular level?
It does.
What other hidden connections, might be out there in the world around us, just waiting for us to figure them out?
That's a great question to ponder. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest things in biology have the most profound consequences.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of lysosomal storage diseases. We hope this exploration has given you a clearer picture of these conditions.
Hope it was helpful.
And if there are other intricate topics you'd like us to unpack in the future, please do let us know.